The first thing my new roommate said to me was, "You'll be gone by the end of the month." Not hello, not welcome. Just that, delivered flatly from across a kitchen that smelled like strong coffee and printer ink, while I stood in the doorway of apartment 4B holding a box of books and a growing suspicion that I'd made a terrible mistake. Her name was Zoe. Short for Zola, she told me later, though she said it like the clarification was a gift she wasn't sure I deserved. She was sitting at a long work table positioned near the window, laptop open, 3 different notebooks spread around her, and a set of noise-canceling headphones resting around her neck like a necklace that meant something. She had natural hair pulled back loosely, dark brown eyes that looked at everything a full second longer than most people did, and the kind of stillness that isn't calm, it's controlled. Like someone who had learned to be still because movement cost her something. I set the box down. That's a bold opening line. She looked at the box, then at me. It's also a pattern. You're the third person to stand in that doorway with boxes since February. It's October. I know what month it is. My name is James Ibarra. I was 32, newly transferred to Vancouver from Toronto, and the apartment I'd been lined up to rent had fallen through 48 hours before my flight. When the previous tenant decided, apparently, that leaving was too much administrative effort. A colleague at my new firm had mentioned Zoe was looking for someone to split a 2-bedroom in Kitsilano. The commute was good. The rent was fair. The roommate came with a warning, apparently, that I had not fully received in time. "What happened to the other 2?" I asked. Zoe turned back to her laptop. "First one couldn't handle how I work. Second one had a problem with quiet. I work from home 3 days a week, and I grew up with a brother who hadn't spoken voluntarily since 2009. She looked up. The assessment in her expression wasn't unfriendly. It was just thorough. "Your room's down the hall. The bathroom schedule is on the fridge. Don't use the left burner on the stove. It runs hot. And don't move anything on this table." She gestured at the work table. "Even if something looks out of place, especially if it looks out of place." I glanced at the table. 3 notebooks, a color-coded sticky note system, a thermos with a strip of orange tape around the handle, 2 pens positioned parallel to each other on the left side. Is the orange tape a system? Temperature marking. That's the hot thermos. The blue one's cold. That's actually smart. She paused. Most people would have said thank you, or shrugged, or at least acknowledged it. Zoe looked back at her screen. "Don't touch either of them." I carried my boxes to the room. The room was clean, bright, and south-facing. There was a small closet, a radiator that worked, and a window that looked out over a narrow street lined with the kind of maple trees that were just starting to turn in that particular Vancouver way. Slow, reluctant, like they'd rather not commit to autumn yet. I stood there for a moment, thinking that if the roommate was a problem, at least the light was good. By the time I came back from my second trip from the car, Zoe had put her headphones on. She didn't look up. I didn't interrupt. That was apparently the right call, she noticed. The next morning I was in the kitchen making eggs when she came out, headphones off, wearing a faded UBC sweatshirt, and reading something on her phone with the focused attention of someone disarming a bomb. She moved around me to the counter, picked up the orange-taped thermos, then stopped. "You cleaned the stove. Left burner had a spill ring around it. I figured it was old." She looked at the stove, then at me. "I would have gotten to it." "I know. It was there." I turned back to the eggs. "I didn't touch the work table." A pause. Then she pulled out a mug, poured from the thermos, and said nothing, which I was starting to understand was her version of acknowledged. Zoe was a UX accessibility consultant. She worked mostly remotely, took contracts with tech companies in the US and Europe, and spent the hours between 10 and 2 in what I could only describe as absolute productive silence, broken occasionally by short, precise video calls where her voice shifted into a register so calm and authoritative that I'd stop whatever I was doing in the next room just to listen. She had a cognitive processing difference. She told me this on day 3, not an explanation of anything specific, more like someone submitting documentation. "I work non-linearly," she said. "I need the table system. I need the noise levels to stay consistent. And I need people not to narrate at me when I'm thinking, what does narrating at you look like?" She looked up from her notebook. "Talking to fill space, asking how it's going, checking in, performing consideration." I thought about my last apartment in Toronto, where my ex-girlfriend had needed to debrief every evening, out loud in sequence. Got it. You said that easily. I meant it easily. She held my gaze for a second, went back to her notebook. Test 1 passed, I think. I wasn't sure I'd know until she told me differently. The headphone system I figured out by day 4. Orange-taped thermos on her desk meant deep work. Do not interrupt under any circumstances. Blue thermos meant working but interruptible. No thermos on the desk meant she was between tasks and a question wouldn't cost anything. I noticed before she explained it. She explained it anyway, a week in the same documentation tone. You already knew, she said, watching my face. I'd worked it out. Something shifted in her expression. Not warm exactly. Less cautious. Most people ask me to explain it verbally every time. Like the system isn't enough by itself. The system's clear. She looked back at her screen. Right. I made a point not to mention that I'd found it impressive. I was starting to understand that impressive was a word people used when they wanted to make Zoe's practicality into an achievement. And she didn't need it framed that way. It was, objectively, just a good system. On day 9, she had a hard morning. I didn't know the terminology yet. I learned it later. The vocabulary she used for when the processing difficulty wasn't background noise but the main event. What I knew that morning was that the apartment was too quiet in the wrong way. Usually Zoe's quiet was active, purposeful, the kind that felt like weather. That morning it was the other kind. At 9:30 I knocked once lightly on her bedroom door. Zoe. A long pause, then her voice came through flat and careful. I'm not available. Okay, I'm making oatmeal if you want some. Silence. I don't like oatmeal. There's also the leftover miso soup from last night. I'll leave it in the pot. Another silence. Then, quieter. That's fine. I didn't check on her. I kept the TV off and my calls on mute with earbuds, and I moved around the apartment the way you move around someone's sleep. Not tiptoeing, which would have been its own kind of announcement, just low and steady and present without taking up too much room. Around noon, she came out in a loose gray cardigan, sitting differently than usual, like she'd temporarily set down some of her own structure. She went to the kitchen, heated the soup without comment, and carried it to the work table. The blue thermos was out. I was on my laptop at the dining table. After a few minutes, she said, without looking up, "This happens sometimes." I gathered. Most people want to help. The word came out the way Zoe delivered words she found imprecise. Or they want to check in. Or they ask what they can do. What do they actually do that's useful? She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about most things. They leave the soup. They don't perform concern. I nodded and went back to my screen. She worked for 2 hours after that, slow and interrupted, pausing sometimes to press her fingers flat against the tabletop like she was recalibrating. I didn't comment on any of it. At 3 o'clock, she closed the laptop and said, "The rug in the hallway." I looked up. What about it? It shifts. I catch it sometimes when I'm tired. It's been bothering me. I stood, went to the hallway, folded the rug, and put it in the closet. You didn't ask if I wanted it gone entirely, she said from the kitchen. Do you? A pause. Yes. Then it's gone. She came to stand in the hallway and looked at the bare floor for a moment. Then she said, "You're harder to dislike than the last 2. You're the 3rd person to suggest that might be a problem for you." Her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Enough to register. "It's not a problem," she said. "It's a variable I hadn't accounted for." I went back to my laptop. Neither of us said anything else. The afternoon felt like something had shifted in it, quiet and small and not worth naming yet. On day 12, I came home from the office to find a post-it note on the kitchen counter. Yellow. Below the blue tape line she'd marked at the lower edge of the cabinet. Not a reach limit this time, she'd explained, but a visual organizer, a boundary between her prep space and general counter space. The post-it said, "Miso paste is in the back of the 2nd shelf if you're making soup again. The good kind." I stood there reading it longer than made sense. It was just information. It was also, I was starting to understand how Zoe said things she wasn't ready to say out loud. I left a post-it back. Thanks. Used it already. The good kind is correct. The next morning her mug was on the counter by the coffee maker with a 2nd mug beside it. She was already at her table. I poured coffee for both of us and set hers beside the blue thermos without a word. She wrapped both hands around the mug and kept working. We ate dinner at the table 3 nights that week. The first night because we'd both ordered from the same Thai place and the timing aligned. The second because Zoe had made extra rice and said, without looking at me, "There's too much rice." The third because by then it seemed like the kind of thing we were doing now. She was working on an audit of a financial services app. She told me about it in the particular way she shared things, precise, unsentimental, more interested in the structural problem than the story around it. Their onboarding flow has 9 steps, she said. For a user with a processing difference, the cognitive load by step 4 is enough to cause abandonment. They've built an interface for someone who thinks the way their developers think. Which is who? People who don't need the interface. I leaned back. Can you fix it? I can tell them how to fix it. Whether they listen depends on whether their product lead decides accessibility is a legal liability or a design principle. What's your read? She ate a forkful of rice. He scheduled the meeting for 6 a.m. Pacific to accommodate his New York colleagues. The accessibility consultant is in Vancouver. She paused. I rescheduled it. 2:09 and sent the meeting notes in a format compatible with their company's screen reader software, which their original attachment was not. I looked at her. You corrected their accessibility before you'd even started the accessibility audit. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did. It needed correcting. I said, that must be exhausting. She looked up sharply, ready for the tone people usually had behind that word. I clarified. Not you, the job. Spending all day pointing out that the world is built for someone who isn't your client. The sharpness didn't disappear, but it turned into something more careful. She looked back at her rice. My last contract, she said. The project manager kept introducing me in calls as our accessibility expert, who really gets it because of her own experience. She said the last part in a flattened imitation of someone else's voice. Like my diagnosis was my qualification. What did you say? I said my qualification was 11 years of UX research and a master's from Waterloo. Then I sent him a revised meeting agenda and didn't mention it again. I put my fork down. Good. She looked at me, checking for the subtext, I think. Finding none, she went back to eating. People mean well, she said, quieter. That's almost the most tiring part. I didn't push. We ate. The Vancouver rain started up against the windows. The specific October rain that sounds like someone tapping the glass without urgency. Just to remind you it's there. She was quiet for a minute. Then, I had a colleague once who used to tell clients my methods were unconventional. She said unconventional the same way she'd said accessible. Like a word being used wrong in public. What he meant was that I don't process the way he expected. So he reframed it as a style choice instead of an asset. What happened to him? He's still there. I left for a better contract. She tilted her head slightly. He emailed me 3 months later to say he'd recommended me to a friend. I laughed. She didn't, exactly, but her shoulders did something close to it. That was the night I started noticing things I didn't have clean language for yet. On day 15, my work laptop decided to update itself at the worst possible time and bricked my morning. I was on the phone with IT at 8, then at 9, then sitting on the floor of the hallway at 10, with my back against the wall, and the distinct feeling that professionalism was a thing that happened to other people. Zoe came out of her room, saw me, said nothing, went to the kitchen. 5 minutes later, she reappeared and set a mug of coffee on the floor beside me without comment. Then she went back to the work table. I drank the coffee on the floor. I did not cry. I came close. When I finally fixed the issue at 11:15, I stood up, carried the mug to the kitchen, and said, "Thank you." She didn't look up from her screen. Blue thermos was out, meaning I'd been interruptible, meaning she'd noticed and calibrated and done the useful thing, meaning if I was reading it right, that she'd been paying attention all along. I washed the mug and went back to work. On day 18, I got a text from a number I recognized before I looked at the name. My ex from Toronto, Diane. We'd been good for 3 years and then not good for 1, in the specific way where both people keep trying out of inertia, and only one of them realizes how much energy that takes. Her message said, "Heard you're settled in Vancouver. Wanted to check in." Below it, 3 seconds later, "Also heard you're renting from someone high maintenance. Hope you're not taking it on like you always do." I set my phone face down on the table. Zoe appeared from the hallway, orange thermos in hand, mid-task. She stopped, looked at my face. "You don't have to tell me." "I know." She went to the kitchen, refilled the thermos, and said on her way back, "The left burner is fixed, by the way. Maintenance came at 2. I thought you had a call at 2. I moved it. You moved a work call to deal with the stove? She set the thermos down at her desk. You mentioned the left burner was unpredictable last week. The maintenance window was today. I looked at her. She was already sitting back down, headphones going on. She said, without turning around, "Orange tape. I'll be done by 4." I turned my phone back over, looked at Diane's message. Then I put the phone in my room and made a decision about what I wanted to spend the afternoon on, and it wasn't that. Day 21, the building's internet went down. Not just our unit, the whole building. The provider estimated a 4-hour outage window, which in Zoe's world was not an inconvenience but a structural failure. She had a deliverable due at 3. A full UX audit report with annotated wireframes, specific recommendations, and a 12-page accessibility scoring rubric she had been building for 6 weeks. Her phone data was too slow for the file size. Her client was in London. It was 8 in the morning and her face had gone to a place I hadn't seen before, not angry. Worse. Contained. "I can drive you," I said. She looked at me. "My office has guest Wi-Fi. No one gets in until 9:30. I have a key card. We can be there in 20 minutes. She was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't deciding, it's accounting. Running calculations I couldn't see. "You have a meeting at 9. It's a standing update. I can dial in from the office." Another silence. Then, "I need the large monitor. I can't present wireframes on a laptop screen. There are monitors in the client boardroom. No one uses it before noon." Zoe looked at me for a long time. Not the way she'd looked at me on day 1, assessing for exit probability. Something different. Like she was revising a previous conclusion. "Okay," she said finally. "Give me 7 minutes." She was ready in 6. We drove across the Burrard Bridge in the kind of quiet that wasn't tense but was full. The city still gray and early and wet, and she had her laptop bag on her lap and her coffee in the cup holder, and she was reading something on her phone, efficient right up until she wasn't. At the second red light, she said, without looking up, "You didn't ask if I'd be okay. You'd already handled it." A pause. "You didn't offer solutions before I asked for them either. You didn't need suggestions. You needed a monitor and an internet connection." The light changed. She looked out the window for a moment. The last person who saw me in a situation like that, a deadline, an obstacle. He spent 40 minutes trying to fix it himself, so he could be the one who fixed it. I didn't say anything. "He meant well," she said. It sounded identical to every other time she'd used that phrase. We got to the office. I set her up in the boardroom, pulled out the monitor cable, got her connected. She was already in her deliverable before I'd left the room. My standing meeting ran over. Hers ended at 2:58. I found her in the boardroom at 3:15, annotating something by hand in the notebook with the color-coded tabs, calm the way she was calm after something hard, not relaxed, recalibrated. "File sent," she said. "Good," she capped her pen. "You didn't check on me, orange thermos." She looked up. The orange thermos was on the table beside her laptop. She'd brought it from home. She hadn't thought about it. Maybe. Or maybe she had. "I didn't even notice I'd done that," she said. "The system works even when you're not running it consciously." She looked at the thermos for a moment. Then she started packing her bag. "Thank you, James." She said my full name. Not in a formal way. In the way people say a name when they mean the person. I took the monitor cable back to its drawer and pretended that hadn't landed somewhere specific in my chest. On the drive back, she said, "My previous roommate, not the first 2, someone before all this." She paused. "We were together for 2 years. I kept my eyes on the road. He understood the system intellectually. He thought it was interesting. He read articles about cognitive processing differences and sent them to me with highlights, which I know was caring. But he treated my mind like a documentary he was enjoying, not a life he was in." She looked out at the water as we crossed back over the bridge. "When it got hard, when the system broke down because I was having a bad period or a high-demand week, and the apartment stopped running the way it needed to, he'd get frustrated. Not loudly, just quietly. The way someone gets frustrated when something they thought was charming turns out to be a permanent feature." I said, "He liked the idea of you." She turned. "Yes, not the actual logistics." "The logistics are me," she said. It came out quieter than I think she meant it to. People separate them because it's more comfortable. Like the system is a workaround and I'm the real person underneath. But the system is how I exist in the world. It's not a coping mechanism. It's just me. The rain started again as we came off the bridge. I turned the wipers on. I know. She looked at me. I mean, I said, I don't know what it's like, but I know what you're describing. The parts of yourself people ask you to set aside so they can be more comfortable with who they thought you were. A long silence. Who asked you to do that? I thought about Diane's text. A few people. More recently, one. Zoe didn't push. She looked out the window for the rest of the drive. But when we got back to the building, when I unlocked the lobby door and held it, she stopped for a moment and said, "You didn't make the drive into a thing." It was a 20-minute drive. People make 20-minute drives into things they need to be thanked for. I let the door close behind us. You'd have figured something out. I know. She looked at me steadily. That's not the point. I understood what she was saying. I understood it in the specific way you understand something you haven't had words for, and then suddenly do. She didn't need to be saved. She needed someone who saw her solving her own problems and stayed close enough to hand her what she asked for. She turned toward the elevator. I fell into step beside her. That evening we ate dinner again, her at the work table, me at the dining table, close enough to talk and far enough to work. She was finishing a secondary report. I was reading through a contract. The rain had settled into the long, even kind that meant it was in for the night. At some point she said, without looking up, "You're going to the Planning Commission hearing Thursday." It wasn't a question. I had mentioned it once, in passing, a week ago. Yeah. Old office building conversion project. The one on Hastings, you remembered. You said the accessibility specs in the original plans were non-compliant. She turned a page. I looked it up. I stopped reading. You looked up my project? The building's seismic upgrade was filed in 2021. The ramp grade in the northwest entrance is over the CSA standard by 2 degrees. She said it the same way she said everything. Just information, just true. If someone flags it at the hearing, the commission could push back the approval. I was staring at her. How did you? The permit applications are public. She uncapped a pen. I sent you the file number. I checked my email. There it was, sent at 11:43 the previous night, a subject line that just said Hastings St. Northwest Ramp. I opened the attached document. It was a 4-page analysis, annotated, with the applicable CSA standard highlighted and a reference to a successful commission challenge in Burnaby in 2019 that had used the same argument. I looked up at her. She was writing something in the notebook, not looking at me. Zoe, you spent time on this? It took 40 minutes. You didn't have to. She set the pen down and looked at me across the apartment. Not the careful assessment from day one. Not the recalibrating look from the office. Something steadier than both. You fixed the rug and didn't tell me you were going to. You stayed out of the way when I needed you to. You handed me what I asked for in the boardroom and didn't wait around to be thanked. She picked the pen back up. 40 minutes is nothing. I looked down at the document in my email, read the first paragraph. Stopped somewhere in the third sentence because I was having trouble keeping the words orderly. I typed back, "This is good. Really good, thank you." Her laptop chimed with the reply. She read it. Then she typed back, "The northwest ramp needs to be corrected regardless. But also, you're welcome." That was as close to a post-it as she'd ever sent me in real time. The hearing was Thursday. I used the analysis. The commission pushed back on the ramp grade. The project architect, to his credit, agreed on the spot to revise the drawings. My manager called it a win. I called Zoe from the sidewalk outside City Hall and said, "It worked." A pause. Then, "Of course it did. The data was correct. I know, I just wanted to tell you it worked." A longer pause. "Thank you for telling me." I stood on the sidewalk in the November rain, which in Vancouver is a different creature than October rain. More settled, more committed, less apologetic, and felt something that didn't have a clean name yet, but was taking up a specific amount of space in my chest. That evening I got another text from Diane. "Haven't heard back. Hope things are good." And then, a moment later, "I've been thinking maybe we should talk about what went wrong. I feel like we never really closed it properly." I sat with my phone for a while. Not because I was tempted, exactly. Because I wanted to be honest about why I wasn't. I went to the kitchen to make tea. Zoe was at her table, blue thermos out, in the between-task space she sometimes got to at the end of a long day, not quite working, not quite done. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She turned. "You already are." "Fair." I leaned against the counter. "Is it strange? The idea of wanting something that complicates the situation you've built? She was quiet for a moment, considering the question on its own terms. You mean something you weren't planning for? Yes. That depends on whether it's actually complicating things or just requiring new accounting. I looked at her. What's the difference? Complicating means it makes what you've built worse. New accounting means you have to revise the model. She picked up the blue thermos. I revise models all the time. I don't like to, but I'm good at it. I said, there's someone I'm not calling back. I just wanted to be clear about why. She looked at me. Steady. Patient. Patient, which was a specific thing I had come to recognize, not the waiting kind, the listening kind. Because she liked the version of me that didn't have a life she found inconvenient, I said. And I spent a year trying to be that version. I'm not doing it again. Zoe held the thermos with both hands. What version are you now? The one who fixes stoves and shows up with a key card when the internet's out and cares more than he expected to about a UX audit he has no business caring about. Her expression shifted. The careful part. The part that had learned to stop itself. James, I know, I said. I'm not making a speech. I'm just telling you where I am. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, the model I've been running assumes you'll realize this is complicated and start looking for an exit. I know, and I'm still not running the numbers on leaving. Zoe set the thermos down. She looked at it for a second, then at me. Then she said, you should know that this, she gestured, a small arc, meaning the apartment, the systems, herself, everything, doesn't get less specific. The accounting I need, the way I work, the hard mornings. It doesn't simplify because the situation changes. I know. You keep saying that because I mean it each time. She was quiet. Then quietly, I'm aware of how that would be useful to say and not mean. I know, I said again, and watched her almost laugh. She didn't. But she looked at the table, and at the notebook, and at the color-coded system she had built so that the world made enough sense to live in, and when she looked back up at me, there was something in her face that she didn't try to close off. The model, she said, may require significant revision. I stayed where I was. Didn't move toward her, didn't press it. The moment had its own structure, and I wasn't going to crowd it. I can wait for the new version. It may take time. Zoe, I fixed the stove ring in this apartment with a paper clip and some patience. I can manage. She looked at me for a long second. Then she turned back to her table and picked up her pen and said, don't be smug about the paper clip. Too late. She shook her head. But before she put the headphones on, she said, quieter, not quite to me, and not quite to herself. The model revision has already started for what it's worth. I made my tea. Went back to my room. Did not, under any circumstances, smile about it in the hallway where she could see. I didn't call Diane back. I didn't need to close anything there. It was already closed. I just hadn't been paying attention to the right door. We didn't become something definable right away. That part came slowly, the way it deserved to. In revised models and post-it notes and drives across the Burrard Bridge and dinners that started because there was too much rice and continued because neither of us wanted to stop. The first time Zoe let me close enough to matter in a way that wasn't deniable, we were in the kitchen arguing, genuinely, in the productive way we'd learned to argue, about whether the new cabinet layout I'd proposed was more functional than her existing system or just different in ways I found more intuitive. She won, obviously. She was correct. The existing system was better. What happened after I conceded was that she said, you actually listened to the argument. And I said, you actually made one. And she looked at me for a moment with that look I still couldn't fully translate. And then she rolled her chair closer and said, I revised the model. I know. Stop saying I know. What would you like me to say? She thought about it seriously. Then, nothing. This is sufficient. And she was right. It was. The apartment stopped being a sublet and started being a home in the way homes actually happen. Not in a single moment, but in accumulated small facts. The second mug that appeared beside the coffee maker. The key she had cut for me, without mentioning it until I couldn't find mine. The notebook, the third one from the left on her work table, that started containing both our handwriting. One night, months later, I came home late from a client dinner to find Zoe at the table, headphones on, deep in something. The orange thermos. I didn't interrupt. I put the leftovers from the dinner in the fridge with a post-it that said which container was which and went to bed. In the morning, there was a post-it on the coffee maker. Her handwriting. The labeling system is growing on me. Don't get smug. I didn't. I made coffee below the blue tape line, poured 2 mugs, and set hers on the table beside the orange thermos. She wrapped her hands around it without looking up. The apartment was still and warm and specific. The rain was at it again outside. Everything was exactly where it belonged. And that, the particular quiet of a space that had learned to hold both of us, was the moment I understood that staying hadn't been something I'd proven. It had just become the only thing that made sense.